Hello, ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travelers. It is a great pleasure to welcome you here this morning for our discussion on the museum, the future of the museum, in relation to its digital frontiers. This is not the first time we discuss here in Art Basel about the future of the museum. I've been moderating a very kind of long-term series of panels about the museum. It started all with a very general panel we had about the museum at large, and then went into all kinds of different geographies about the future of the museum in India, in China, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, in the United States, in Latin America, etc. And this is an ongoing panel. The idea is that we somehow build up a lot of elements, and it's kind of one can say, a long-term project which tries to produce literature and information about this idea where the museums might go. We felt that this year it could be interesting to focus less on a geographic frontier, so as to say, than more on the question of the digital frontier, something which happened rather recently, that there has been more discussions about digital museums compared to other fields like the music field. The art world continues to be less involved with the internet, something which is about to change. And I'm very, very happy that we have actually 4 very distinguished speakers here today who all, in their own specific ways, are pioneers of the digital frontier of the museum. We have Faggionato, founder and chief executive officer of BlueLabel, a new initiative in London. We have Fang, who is co-founder and artistic director of Vitamin Creative Space in Guangzhou and the shop in Beijing, as well as initiator and producer of Sourface project in Second Life, about which he will talk today, one of the first major projects of an artist in Second Life. We have Roth, who is Director General of the Staatliche Kunstsammlungen in Dresden, a museum which has pioneered a digital museum in an exemplary way. Same thing is true for Peter Weibel, who is Chairman and CEO of ZKM, Center for Art and Media, pioneer for many, many, many decades, one can say, of this idea of how the future of the museum works and how digital museums could evolve. Now, what I suggest is, because we want to have some time for discussion, and sometimes the danger is if we have too long speeches, is that we at the end, it's a classic, we always run out of time to discuss. So I suggest that we have 4 short speeches of approximately 10 minutes, which gives us then about 50 minutes, 1 hour to discuss the topic. I'm very happy to invite our first speaker now, Faggionato. As I said, founded BlueLabel, and this is a very special moment because it's the first time ever that speaks in public about this project, so we can say this is a world premiere. A very warm welcome to Faggionato.
Thank you, Ulrich. Personal histories are not interesting until they form experiences. A long time ago, as a very young dealer, I was a big interest in Constantin Brancusi, the sculptor, and did a lot of research on his work. And more or less at the same time, researched and sold a few Gonzalez sculptures. And one day I arrived in the Kunsthaus library in Zurich to find a catalog which I'd never ever seen in my life. And with great surprise, I realized it was a Japanese catalog of an exhibition which had taken place in Japan 6 months prior, of new Brancusi casts. My heart stopped, and I felt really queasy. Short after that, the heirs of, the estate of Gonzalez said, "Anne, this piece doesn't exist, you sold it already in the iron, here's the bronze." And again, my heart sank, and I thought, what are we doing here? Now, there's a big difference between the Brancusi bronze and the Gonzalez cast, and that is the intention of the artist, which only if you research it do you understand what it is. Yes, legally, the French can cast up to X bronzes, and they're not fakes, except that Brancusi would spend 15 years polishing his bronzes and never had any intention of having anybody casts after his demise. Whereas Gonzalez, bless him, wish he had the money to cast in his lifetime. So that taught me that regardless of what the legal situation is, what is really important is the intention of the artist and what exactly does the artist mean to produce, whether it is in a bronze or a painting or anything else. Later on, the medium that we were working with became more and more complicated, and from bronze or marble or plaster, we went into 2, 3, 4 lines of medium. More often than not, we forget 1 or 2 of them. Then titles became really interesting, and if you take Damien Hirst, for instance, his titles are very precise, and if you look at an auction catalog where they've omitted a comma and or a capital, the title is no longer the same. So all of that basically taught me that with the new technology, we should be able to create a tool for the artist to consign everything that they wish to consign about the work they have just created. And for all this data to be encapsulated in 2 forms, one very rigid, which is what we all call the fields, the title, the date, the size, the installation, the whatever the fields are, and then to be able to give the artist as much free text, as much video space, audio space, scan space, or whatever, to add on whatever they feel like adding on at the time of creation. We're trying to get the artist, for instance, to give us the weight of their sculpture as and when they make it, so that we know and we don't have to re-weigh later. Once all that data is consigned by the artist is asked to check it, to double check it, and lock it. Once it's locked, what the artist has created is a label, like we used to have in the old days. The reason I use the word label is because we used the labels at the back of paintings to give us a history of the painting and also a description of the work and where it's been and what happened to it. So that's how BlueLabel came about. I'm not going to explain, in great details how the system works because you can eventually check it out for yourself. The intent for us is to give space to the artist to do something that they don't like doing, but which that if they don't do it, somebody else will do it for them. And somebody else is going to be the gallery and or whatever begins to describe the work of art that has been consigned either to the museum, to the gallery. Now, yes, it's going to be tricky to force, or force is the wrong word, obviously, but to encourage artists to do something when they hardly know which day of the week it is. What I'm hoping is that they will take responsibility for the ontology of their own work, and that if they decide that this is an edition of 3, that at the time of creation they consign once and forever it was an edition of 3, and no dealer afterwards can convince him or her to increase the size of the edition or to decrease it whether in response to the market. So this tool doesn't take the place of the gallery because it's just digital images watermarked for the protection of the artist. Doesn't take the place of the auction because it's not a selling place. What I'm hoping is that catalog raisonnés of the future without BlueLabel would be much more difficult to write because we do have the letters of Van Gogh to his brother, and it would be very difficult to write a decent book on Van Gogh without those letters. I'm not sure what we will be able to write in 20 years' time with text messages and short emails and all the ways that artists communicate between each other and what traces they leave behind. So it's been 2 years in the making and 30 years of experience in the art world to try and come up with something that is not a threat to anybody, but should be a tool for everybody to get close to the work of art in the form that it was created, and hopefully facilitate for museums, installations, restorations, and various other actions that the museum has to take to keep the life of the work of art. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Anne. Many thanks. I have now the great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Fang, who lives between Guangzhou and Beijing and has many parallel realities. He's one of China's leading poets and novelists. He also is a gallerist, he's an art critic, he's a curator, and many, many other aspects of his work. But today he's going to speak as the producer of Surface Project for Second Life. A very warm welcome to Fang.
Thank you. Yeah, before I have a kind of short, probably introduction of I'm a City, which is initiated by Surface and developed with vitamin in Second Life. So I would like to somehow just through some like perspective on this topic, because I think it's quite interesting for me to sitting here to talking about the future of museum, even though that I don't have any like experience really working for museum, but Vitamin as an individual initiation that we are somehow very keen to explore where the kind of interesting model of so-called kind of private institution where that you really can be flexibly led, you know, like make a dialogue with the most exciting contemporary artistic practices that which is always somehow from different individual positions. So therefore, that there is lots of kind of philosophical probably discussion about what's the meaning of a space. For example, if like let's take this glass in front of me. Actually, I think the function of glass that it contains water, but as Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu says that because it's empty, then it can contain water. So basically, the useful of the glass because of its useless somehow, because it's empty, it's somehow it's fragile, but therefore actually it's function more. So that also leads a lot of questions about the form, that what's the meaning of the, you know, where the relationship between form and content, and I think it's, especially in this contemporary moment, there is very exciting phenomena of making spaces from different kind of initiation, so which also push the territory of museum also into a quite diverse field. For example, that I think when Harald Zeeman initiated this museum project from his father or godfather, right? He transformed into a museum which to present his life. I think this is really inspiring moment that how museum really can connect to different traces of life, and then the function is not only preserve the memory and the time, but also produce the memory. And so therefore, I think also in Asian and Chinese context that we, because of this kind of isolation of maybe institution in official level, there is lots of interest initiated from kind of diverse position. For example, a shopping mall can be a museum because we see this Mori Art Museum in Tokyo, in Ropingo, which is becomes very dynamic art museum in Asian art scenes. And then probably, I don't know, probably National Pavilion can be a museum. And we saw this year the Singapore Pavilion, this the project by the Singaporean artist Ming Wang and the curator Teng Fu Quan. They really transformed the pavilion into a kind of a cinematic archive room where that you will find these archives from the golden time of Singaporean movie industry. And the fact is, even in Singapore, they don't have this museum for all these archives from golden time. And so I think this is actually opened up a very interesting perspective on the maybe the development of museum. And so I think probably I just want to input maybe 2 points that into this discussion. One is I would say that maybe I kind of from observation, I think reality becomes more theatrical, or maybe reality becomes theater. That's also the experience from maybe the marathon events that we made with Hans Ulrich in Beijing. We find out that there is very interesting parallel reflection of the marathon events in online platform. Like there is almost, when the marathon is going on, there are almost this kind of very quick reflection from tweet, especially from tweet and the blog, that is almost parallel to reflect the marathon movement. So basically that the reflection is not happen after the events, rather it's happening in the same times, which means that the reflection of reality becomes almost simultaneously? Yes, simultaneously. And which actually turn the events in reality becomes kind of theatrical piece, because there is happening in reality, then meantime that you actually reflect yourself, and also you see what's the reflection on this. And I think this also maybe push this, the second point I would like to maybe address, that then if the reflection is somehow related to the way that how we keep time, how we preserve memory, that also means that probably the function of a museum also somehow pushed into the field that there is kind of needs of producing the memory, which probably is also interesting to see. So then probably these two perspectives also related to the RMB City project that we developed in Second Life, because that's kind of virtual city, but also it's a space that you really can transform all these the memory and action from the first life, we say the reality, into the kind of a parallel reality, which transform while making dialogue with our own life, and it constructs kind of a new awareness that we are in. And so maybe I just quickly to show two clips from RMB City. One is about the construction of RMB City. It also reflects this kind of urban development and architecture of the infrastructure of maybe the building, who really can make something happen. And then the second one is the more like a theatrical piece, which is based on the economic crisis. There is kind of, it's called People's Rimbaud. So there is kind of discussion of how we understand and how these kind of crises can turn into another direction in the second life. And so hopefully this, it's not directly related to the Museum of Future, but it's kind of maybe open up to some maybe discourses for discussion. So
we're gonna see a clip?
Yeah. So can we play the movie? Right. Sorry, it's always has some. So the first one is about the architecture. So it's interesting that when there is kind of parallel maybe process that making the space, but meantime also try to give in the meaning of the space. So the second video shows that how there is activity happen in the IMB city, which gives the city life, meantime also reflect that how this memory really can be productive to produce another reality. So I'm gonna show just one chapter, 30 seconds, from People's Rimbaud. Okay, that's all. And so basically that there is kind of different, different character from like history, like Marx, and also there is kind of hilarious moment that all these historical people making dialogue and discussing about contemporary situation. And so I think that's, it's more or less my perspective, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Fang. Thank you. Now we have, first of all, a more philosophical insight into the topic, and then a concrete example of an artist presented by Fang. And at this point in time, we wanted actually to have an artist presenting his vision of the future of the Digital Museum, Corey Archangel, who due to illness cannot be with us here today. So we wish him a very fast recovery. Corey has sent us an email which he asked me to read to you as his contribution to the panel, which I think would be the moment to do now. So this is an email which arrived on June the 11th at 2 o'clock at night from Corey Archangel. I'm really sorry that I could not be part of this panel in person. I would have loved to be present, but the limits of modern medicine dictated my plans. Also, I will recount some thoughts virtually that I have been wrestling with lately, which are more or less related to what you are about to discuss. I've been thinking a lot about MP3s and vinyl records lately. Both are audio recording technologies that are often compared. When compared, usually the argument revolves around which is better in terms of sound quality. I will not dwell on my own stance in this argument. Rather than arguing about quality, I would like to point to a different comparison between the two technologies. I would like to compare the two formats in terms of maintenance. During 10 years of using MP3s, I have to my surprise discovered that they are quite difficult to maintain. To maintain MP3s over a decade means avoiding hard drive failures, disk space issues, operating system incompatibility, organization issues, and music player incompatibility. During the past 10 years, I have had 5 different computers and at least 4 drive failures, and unfortunately, I have lost countless MP3s along the way. The problems of vinyl record maintenance are equally as daunting. There are space and handling issues. Vinyl maintenance is especially difficult when one has to move. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that both are about as difficult to maintain. The main difference, though, is the perception of maintenance between the two formats. Vinyl is honest about its maintenance issues upfront, whereas MP3s are not. By virtue of its physicality, a vinyl record says immediately upon purchase, I take up space. I collect dust. I am heavy. I am delicate. Digital files, on the other hand, say you can listen while jogging. You can store a lifetime of music. The new iPod is as small as a lighter, but are conveniently silent about hard drive crashes and disk space problems. So I would like to ask the panel to keep this situation in mind. Digital anything is never straightforward. It often seems a miracle at first, but after a few years, there turns out to be a range of difficulties. Let's be careful and go slow. That's the statement from Corey Archangel. And I hope we can then, in the discussion, deal with some of his issues. I've got now the great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Dr. Martin Roth, Director General of the Staatliche Kunstmuseum in Dresden. Mr. Roth actually was director from 1991 to 2000 of the Deutsche Hygienemuseum in Dresden. He also is professor at the Technische Universität in Dresden, and among the many committees he's member of, he's part of the UNESCO Commission. When we prepared this panel and talked to many artists and curator museum directors, which are exemplary museums in terms of the digital museum, again and again the museum in Dresden was mentioned. So a very warm welcome to Martin Roth.
Thank you so much, and good morning. You know, when I opened the email of Hans-Ulrich Obrist, the invitation, I thought this is a mistake, this is an error. That's not me being responsible for 15 beautiful, very old collection. We celebrate our 450th anniversary next year. So, and by the way, I stepped out of a meeting at that moment where we talked about the program for 2010 for that anniversary. And then while I read his invitation, I realized very slowly, maybe I can contribute a little bit, but I'm definitely not an expert. I mean, I make it very short because I prefer the discussion, but there are 4 very short, let's say, remarks. The first one, I think there are so many books and articles published with the title The New Museum, starting already in the early 19th century. So I don't know why we can discuss it, but the new museum is always somehow invented. This is one of the reasons why I really like to work in a museum, by the way, because it seems to be a real fixed structure, but it's a very flexible content or whatever. Or it's also a very flexible structure the same. That's the first remark. The second one, it seems to me that the museum has not really a kind of identity. It appears totally different. And the way the museum talks about itself or presents them in public seems to have a very strong identity. But it's exactly the opposite. It has always to mirror itself in the society. I mean, that's one of the reasons. By the way, this micro is like if you have a hanger in your bag. I prefer the old technology in that case. Sorry for that. That's one of the reasons why the museums always are prepared to run into political catastrophes, because they're always quite open to all new ideas, also the horrible, political horrible ones, so they always need this kind of reflection. I mean, this is a kind of thesis. I'm not sure if it's true, but let's discuss about it. So that's the reason why it always needs new technology. I mean, always. We talk about the last 300, 400, 500 years. And we think about the Louvre and the political background of the Louvre, how the Louvre was found and so on. And if we talk about the last 40, 50 years of new technology, so I think the museum was quite naive. Do you remember the time when we said video is the new tool, the new technology, the new art piece, and we run around with cameras like this? I mean, so heavy. Where is it gone right now? I mean, that's exactly what you said. Where is the catalogue raisonné of those art pieces? Or the idea of having the virtual museum, and we talk about that, but not in that way like we did before. Or if I can talk a little bit about the ZKM, because I always admired what you're doing in Karlsruhe. I mean, just 2 very short anecdotes. I remember when I was invited to the opening, and I was standing in front of a showcase together with Heinrich Klotz, and there were 2 youngsters who But they were talking about the art piece there, and they said, I mean, it's so old-fashioned, knowing that we were standing next to them. And by the way, I remember, I mean, this is just an anecdote, I remember a conference in the ZKM when it was very young, and they were very proud to show the new browser technology, and then it totally collapsed. I'm always nervous, like when you open the you know, is it really working?
I never stood.
Yeah, I realized that. So, and then the browser didn't work, and they used an old slide projector, and this one started burning. That was the most horrible catastrophe I ever had at a conference. So, I mean, you know, there's always this kind of not really used to technology. This is always this kind of being a little bit naive and sometimes mixing the tool with the content. That's, I mean, that's the message. That's what I wanted to say. So use it as a tool, and then it's going to be interesting. Don't mix it with the content, because otherwise, if you think about those first programs that we had 20, 30 years ago, just a little bit something moving, and we said, oh, this is an art piece. Do you realize that? So, I mean, there's a great progress in this discussion. So talking about the museum, it is a part of the strategy that we have to control and we have to discuss and so on. That's one of the reasons why I really like to be here this morning. The next point, I mean, I'm sure one of the reasons why you invited me is because we went with our old master gallery into Second Life. And we can discuss about that a little bit later, but that's a quite big success. I'm not sure if it's a success in the internet, but it's a success because you invited me this morning, because we are in the media everywhere, but I talk about the print media. In the classical ones, the day when we went to Second Life, I was in a Lufthansa flight. I couldn't believe it. It was on the Lufthansa newspaper and so on, magazine, and so on. So, you know, it's more the frame around it and not exactly the content. But again, let's talk about that later. And if we talk about the future, also just one remark to continue with it. Again, I don't think that the audience, maybe the artists, but I don't think that the audience 500 years ago said, wow, canvas. You know what I mean? And this is a little bit the situation today, wow, digital. So we have to talk more about the content. I mean, repeat myself. Taking the technology as a tool, it's great for education, it's great to approach the public in a different way. We do it in a national way. We do a lot in China. I mean, more in the classical way, but the communication is so easy. So, you know, this tool is perfect, again, to reach the public in a different way. And last comment, maybe there will something in the near future, which is something like my museum, coming back to referring what you said, is like that everybody has the possibility to create his own museum, his own approach, his own way to look on things, because he can collect wherever he goes, or even in the internet, his own approach to it. And that's the interesting part of it. Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin Roth. I have now the great pleasure to introduce Peter Weibel, who studied literature, medicine, logic, philosophy, and film. So we are back to the parallel realities. He has been from 84 to 89, actually head of digital arts at the media department of New York University in Buffalo, and founded in 89 the Institute of New Media at the Staatliche in Frankfurt, which is when we met. And I remember always very well my very first conversation when I used to work at that time with Caspar Koenig, when I met Peter Weibel in his newly founded institute. And it was in this conversation you for the first time hinted at that future of the digital museum. So I'm very excited you can be here on this panel today, and that panel probably wouldn't have happened without this conversation we've had in 89. Peter Weibel is also curated many pavilions in Venice. He was in charge of Ars Electronica, chief curator at Neue Galerie in Graz, and now he's chairman and CEO of ZKM in Karlsruhe. A warm welcome, very warm welcome to Peter Weibel.
I'm very happy to be here because I think the future of the museum is a very serious question. To give you an idea why it is serious, I will paraphrase this. People ask all the time, what is the future of the printed press? What is the future of radio and television? I got from Austrian television, I got about, together with some friends, about 200,000 euro to make a study, what is the future of Austrian television. Yeah? And even when we got 200,000 euro for the study, we said in 10 years Austrian television does not exist anymore. So it was a bad message for a lot of money. Huh? But to believe me, I have another crown, which is a famous investor, Warren Buffett. He's a successful investor, one of the most successful investors. So I think it would be good to take his advice serious, because he's so successful, Warren Buffett. And Buffett has said something about the printed press, because as you know, in America, many magazines, many very famous magazines in Los Angeles and in San Francisco have closed their daily appearance. They only appear on Thursday, Friday, and weekend. And the rest of the week, very famous magazines have only online editions. And therefore, Warren Buffett lost a lot of money. And then they ask him, what is the future of the printed press? And he says, citation, the people who read are on their way to the grave, because it's an older generation. The young people grew up with the internet. And this is precisely the same problem with radio and with television. And I think precisely this is also the question of the future of the museum, the challenge by the internet, and the challenge is precisely the change of the behavior of the public. So it's correct, it's not about the content. There will still be always the same content more or less in the online press as in the printed press. But the behavior has radically changed. And why has it changed? To understand the influence of the internet, it is not only, and we will discuss it later, what we have seen, Fang, in your demonstration, the virtual museum, this is one thing. But the changes that through the internet, the public has learned to have a very individual and a very mobile approach to the museum. In a normal museum, it is closed in time and space. You have to come to a space at a certain time. You come to go to a museum to see a work from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening. Even very advanced museums like the MoMA and the Pompidou, when they show films, for example, they have a great film collection, video collection. You don't see them in the daytime. Film and video you see in the basement and after closure of the museum. And these are restrictions of space and time which the audience in future will not accept anymore. Because in the internet, they can be 24 hours in the internet. And this is precisely the future of the museum. If you want to be successful, they must be accessible 24 hours all the time. And we must be mobile. So to understand it, it is something like the invention of the transistor radio. The success of pop music has three reasons that we now, it's even too much, in my opinion, too big success, because wherever you go, you hear pop music everywhere. And this was possible by the invention of the transistor radio, that suddenly you could move with your little radio, you could listen to pop music everywhere at any time. And this is precisely what is the future of the museum. I will tell you how it is done technically. This is that you can go to the museum, you can visit the museum, be it a Second Life or whatever, anytime, anywhere. And this will make the museum very attractive. And actually, then the question is, we will have not only digital pieces, what you showed, it changes also the nature of the analog artwork, not only of digital artwork. Because, not to be so fast, I repeat, with the internet, we have the possibility that the time and space of the museum and its content are accessible 24 hours and everywhere. This is so important. So it's not only that I can visit, and which is a marvelous thing, that you have your museum a Second Life, and that Camp, for example, has also a virtual museum where our philosophers from Karlsruhe, like Sloterdijk and Boris Roth, speak continuously, because we have built a machine which takes the text of these philosophers and creates new texts. So we constantly rewrite, with the help of machines, the text of these philosophers. Then we have also, but what is the important thing is, we have works in the museum which are based on the internet. And now comes the point, even the analog work, painting and sculpture, is presented in a digital way. This is the next point. So the artworks, for the first time, speak in a different way to the audience. So you are completely correct here. The digital is a tool for the artist, but it is even more a tool for the public. And this is the future. The public, in the beginning we have these problems of threshold. You mentioned machinery doesn't work. When we open the computer, we don't does it function, etc. But everything is in fact already now possible. We have, to give you one example, you all know the barcode. This barcode, these vertical lines which are on any, at any commodity. This barcode has only a place for 700, only for 17 signs, so the information is very low. Now we have something new called QR code, quick response code. This is now readable not only vertical but also horizontal. Now you can store 17,000 signs. This means when you have your iPhone and photograph this quick response code, this quick QR code, then you can listen music to half a minute, and you can see an animated motion picture for half a minute. That means in 2 years it's even much more, in 3 years it's even much more. So now we have the possibility that our museum is on a paper. You have just graphic designs. You have your iPhone, then you make a photograph of it in the train, wherever, and then you can see our video collection, and you can listen to our sound collection. So it's not only about access, it is the point that we have finally a museum without wall, which was an utopia from the 60s, a museum without wall of space and wall of time. And now we have to invest a lot of money to make these artworks, the analog artwork, and the digital artwork accessible to the public. So when the future of the museum has this digital technology, it is called RFID, radio frequency identification, barcode, quick response code, etc., then this tool for the audience will change the audience in a strong way. Up to now, to have a mass of people, you make these blockbuster exhibitions. You show them art from Manet to Monet, etc., a little bit retarded. So in fact, I have nothing against that big blockbuster, but I have against it that we, the museum, are sacrificing the presence. To have these blockbusters, we show them art which is 100 years old, which is not correct to how we treat the public. With the internet, we have the chance to change the public as an amateur to an expert. So the most important thing is the future of the museum is the opportunity by digital technology to change not only the attitude of the public, but to change even the desire of the public. The public comes to the museum, now it is treated more or less like an idiot, and now, so it's not an expert. And to give you a deeper idea, when the idea of the public was discussed in the beginning of American democracy in the 20th century, the books by these famous philosophers like John Dewey was called The Public and Its Problems. And the book by Walter Lippmann from 1920 was called The Phantom Public. It was a phantom. We are still now hunting not only the new museum, we are still hunting the phantom of the public. Precisely what you said. It was a media success, your virtual museum, but you don't even know is it really visited by the public. So the main problem is the public. But now, with all this technology, where the artwork can speak, we have a lot of information attached to the artwork. Now you go to a museum, you have your phone, and you can take it home and can read more and more about the artwork, and many other things. So by Facebook, by Twitter, the museum becomes a community, a community of experts, and these experts are not only anymore the curators, because with the help of so-called semantic web, like the Tate Modern has a wonderful homepage. So when you want to know how many drawings with columns they have by let's say, by Turner, you have this design and you see all the drawings. And when you want to know how many drawings still exist by other artists with columns, you get it too. So finally, the public has a scientific tool and can turn itself from an amateur to a competent person. All these possibilities will change the public, the audience. And therefore, we, the museum, we have a future, not the printed press.
Many, many thanks, Peter Weibel. I think we've got many questions. I just wanted to launch a few, and then hopefully the discussion will start to flow freely. I mean, one thing I thought would be interesting to pick up on is this last point Peter was just mentioning about the public, because I remember some years ago having been part of some brainstormings of Rem Koolhaas' OMA office when he was working on his project for MoMA, which is an unrealized building. Was late 90s, I think. And in this project, it was really the idea that every visitor could become a curator, in the sense of that a negotiation of the present, the future, and the past. The idea that actually the visitor could not only see the exhibition which is there, but could actually invent his or her own exhibition based on the collection, could have access to all the works which are obviously not there, because the collection always shows only a very small part. So it was almost like an Alighiero Boetti idea. When Alighiero Boetti says, when in a museum we put order, there is always many other possible systems of order, and order is always surrounded by disorder. So I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about this aspect of the public and participation, particularly in relation to the collection, and will then really everybody be a curator?
Our experience is, so normally when we started this kind of moving it as a digital frontier, the fear was always, if you can see a museum on the internet, the audience will not come to the place. Huh? Naturally, we need, for the reason of politics, we need visitors. If you really need them, is another question, because scientific institutions, they don't need visitors. But evidently, museums are not looked at it anymore as a scientific institution. As I said before, with the digital technology, not only the museum but also the visitor can help us to get back to a scientific approach to the museum and to the offerings of the museum. But to come, so the fear was always to come to the point, okay, when you make so much effort for virtual museums and you have everything online, nobody will come. The opposite is the case. I give you some numbers here. In Germany, also in Zeitchemist in Baden-Württemberg, we have a major museum with a wonderful collection in Stuttgart, which makes shows with Manet, etc. They have, and Stuttgart is a city with 600,000 people, a minimum, maybe 800,000. And they have about 260,000 visitors a year, even when they have a show with Manet, which brings them 100,000. The museum in Stuttgart, the City Museum, which is in the center, very attractive copy shop, bookshop in the very center, they have about 140,000 visitors. In a city of 600 to 800,000 people. We in Karlsruhe, we are a small city, 250,000, 280,000, and we have 240,000 visitors. Much more than the City Museum in Stuttgart, and nearly the same as the State Gallery. And this is only possible because we make so much effort to use the digital technology as a tool for the participation of the audience. To give another cipher, to understand it, the Museum of Modern Art in New York has 80% of the visitors only come one time. That means these are tourists who go there because they're in New York and the museum is famous. They don't come a second time. If I would have such a statistic, I would not have this amount of visitors. I need visitors who come again and again, because Karlsruhe, unfortunately, is not a tourist town area. Nobody goes to Karlsruhe because of Karlsruhe. So they only come to us, and they have to come to us because they know they can learn something here and they can participate. So this fear, I can say, just the opposite. When you use this digital technology, which helps the public to educate themselves, but not from, they do it themselves. They learn something, they experiment, they learn a kind of scientific approach to the artwork area, even when it looks like play, but it's an exploration, and they like it, and they come again and again.
Now that leads us to another question, and that's also the question of the limits. What are the limits of using digital technologies in order to experience a specific artwork, or a whole exhibition, or a permanent collection, or a guided tour? And I wanted to ask Martin Roth to tell us maybe a little bit about this question of the limits, particularly in relation also to the Second Life project of the museum, because what happened is that a similar thing, what happened to your museum, this incredible media presence happened when the Prado went online, and when this whole Google project happened, and there was, I tried to get all the articles which came out worldwide on this, at this moment, and it was very interesting because there were all this discussion, could you actually get closer to an artwork now with this new Google technology than you could ever get in the museum? But at the same time, are there limits of that?
But may I ask you one question before I give an answer? I mean, did I get you right? You have kind of computer programs that write the texts of Sloterdijk itself, so he stopped thinking and it's a machine that... That's amazing.
What he's publishing, he writes himself, what he's publishing under his name. But in our museum, we have a virtual museum, we have taken his text, we wrote a program, and he continually speaks in his own way. He doesn't even know what he's uttering in the net. He has no idea.
So it's a book machine?
The book machine, it's a writing machine. It's a writing machine,
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to understand that.
Oh, so he it's the same we have with painting, and the same we have with Greuze. So we have these philosophers who speak constantly to each other, because we could write a program using generative grammar, using the vocabulary, the ideas, so they continuously
Go to the internet, Google,
exactly.
Check the notions, Wikipedia, include Unbelievable. Okay, I have to think about that. I mean, your question sounds so easy to answer, but it's extremely difficult because the limit is just the technology right now. But I think we are somehow on a crossroad or kind of a development that it goes in two different directions. The first part of it is exactly what Peter Weibel said. Means there is a new way of thinking public. Let's take just one notion, research. Since now it was, let's take whatever, the art historian from the university or research center or whatever, and it was this one-dimension approach to an artwork, and then you translate it into the public. Now we have the chance to do it in an opposite way. And this is real. I mean, maybe you read it also in the newspaper because it was quite amazing. We got a lot of money. I mean, we have a lot of budget problems, but we had got a lot of money for provenance research. I hired 60 young researchers. The reason why, because we are still in this kind of after-war situation in the former GDR, means we don't know exactly what's in our storage facilities. Does it belong to us? What do we miss? Is it Jewish belongings or whatever? So finally the government realized it's definitely easier to invest than to have all those claims. So we'd have a huge provenance research project. This is not easy, but it's definitely easier with this way of technology, if you understand what I mean. Because now we have this approach not going just through a few, let's say, research programs. We have the approach that is...
Now we have a much easier scientific approach, not like before.
Yeah, but it's not only the scientific community, if we talk about provenance research and the political impact, it says also a lot about the archives in Russia and so on and so on. You know, it's the whole variety of questions that has to be answered. So this is extremely important to have this kind of new technology. Talking about the Second Life experience, I mean, it was amazing, honestly. I didn't expect that. Didn't expect that public, I didn't expect the discussion about it, and I didn't expect one thing, that is the discussion inside the net. Exactly. It was very boring the first day. I went there in the Zwinger, nobody was there. You walk around and it's horrible, and you say exactly all the people who criticized before, now they are right. Unfortunately, I was totally wrong. The next day, when people read it in the print media, by the way, the traditional, oh, this thing drives me crazy. Then they came to the Zwinger, and then they had all the discussions, the atavas. Then it was like, I mean, it's too simple to explain it to you now, but because you know all those stories, but it was quite amazing to meet somebody from, I don't know, from Cleveland, Ohio, and somebody from Dresden, and the guy from Cleveland said, what a beautiful city, and the guy from Dresden said, may I show you around? I'm your guide, and even you have to come one day. And so this kind of communication started immediately, and now we have this kind of museum friendship group, we have a museum shop, and so on. So that works. Still the limits, the technology, but there is, I mean, you asked me how to deal with the limits, and there's one problem, that's really the art piece, the artwork. I mean, if you can get very close, but it's still quite artificial. I mean, it's much better than it used to be, but it's, so if there's a chance to create a marriage between Google and Second Life, for example. If we take all those technologies together, then it's something. You know, the Prado approach is exactly the opposite. You go to Madrid, you go through the city, and here's the Prado. You go on that button, and you are inside the Prado, and they have, I mean, great technology in terms of the solution of the imprints or the prints of the art pieces, so you have a real good quality. And if you take those two parts together, that would be something that I think has to be achieved in the future. But then we talk about license, then we talk about who will earn the money with that, and so on. So it's in a touristic way, then it's going to be really difficult. But talking about the consumer, talking about the public, let's say there are different approaches. If you manage to get those approaches together, then it's much better in terms of quality.
That opens many, many more questions. First thing I think we could explore a little bit more is this notion of community, which I think is incredibly interesting. And in 2000, I lived in the Sir John Soane's house in London for 1 year, which is the architect Sir John Soane's house, where we curated an exhibition. And it was an extraordinary experience because I experienced the museum as a conversation piece. And Margaret Richardson, the director, former director of the Soane's house, the sister of J.G. Ballard, was telling me again and again what made the Soane's Museum different from most other museums is actually that it builds communities and people do have conversations, which in most museums they don't have. Now, it leads us to Fang because I think the project of Sao Fei is really a community building project of an artist in Second Life, and I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about this idea of digital art producing new communities in relation to that project.
Yeah, actually, maybe Second Life is not like kind of a deliberately, you know, selected by artists, but rather it's kind of existing situation. That the Second Life is initiated by the American company, but then it becomes kind of huge impact on the, not only in the virtual society, the model of how to, you know, have a kind of new approach of virtual community, but also the impact of the economic model. So there is, and also philosophically, I think also it touched this very, the question of this, you know, mirroring society, the imitation of the life, that how, you know, there is kind of blurring between this, the boundary of identity, and so to say that you have really multi-identity that in different layers of the reality. So I think actually what really attracts Cao Fei to encounter this or maybe to experience this virtual world, I think it's mainly based on this kind of question of the identity. And meantime is very much about, you know, how the self-reflection somehow can, you know, push further to explore what's a further way of understanding of human being as well as human relations. I think this is quite probably, I think it takes the Second Life as a platform, but meantime also the question about this, because mainly that within her observation and also like my experience, I think basically the Second Life somehow really reflected what's the mainstream in our society, that actually the desire of capital somehow becomes kind of main domain of the activities of avatars in that world. So so it's really interesting to think about how there is kind of entry of culture input, which can bring probably more like a dynamic understanding of the culture life that in Second Life. I think in that sense, actually, when a city built up in the Second Life, and then there is lots of activities, not only from artists, but also from under the invitation of artists to institution, museum, and individuals. So it kind of slowly, within the process, it's construct kind of a stage for many of activities. Then it somehow distributed in the way that many avatars, that they realize that actually that city, there is no clear purpose of the city. Basically, it's not a city to make money. It's not a city to somehow to propaganda the artist project. Like you have to tell people that my project is fantastic. So it's kind of create kind of a ambiguous, and also it's kind of a green zone, because you can find different activities. You can really, the artists really take this stage as kind of a studio to do the movie, and meantime also the institution doing like exhibition, and then many of the freneers, so-called freneers, this avatar, they just wandering there, and they can find some apartment empty, and even they live there. So. So that's probably also the I think the question of community, maybe take the Army City as the example. I think also backs to the discourse addressed by Jean-Luc Nancy, this kind of incorporative community, meaning that it's not deliberately connected with certain like maybe. How to say, yeah, it's kind of invisible community, that it's constructed in the way that there is kind of a similar probably process of looking for something, and then they got meet in this point where probably that's can be Army City, but I would say also can be any other place. That's probably is quite an interesting, maybe perspective on the community, that how it shapes by the process, and then probably it leads to somewhere. But so far that we probably it's difficult to define, but that you feel this dynamic, and so it's still in the process, I would say.
Yeah, we'll come back to that towards the end of the panel, because we'll ask you something about unpredictability, and that maybe the Digital Museum has less to do with the master plan and maybe more related to Cedric Price. But before coming to that question, I had a question for Anne. I wanted to ask you to maybe comment or say a few things on Corey Archangel's email which he sent us, because I thought this, I mean, it really is something which Jonas Mekas also addressed when I had a conversation with him the other day, and which we somehow could summarize as digital paranoia, and as Jonas Mekas said, a very, very bloody well justified digital paranoia, because things do disappear, and Corey's email confirms that. So I was wondering on how your project will deal with that dimension, and how to create sustainability and maybe long-term dimension within your project.
That was my main worry when I started, being totally untrained and unschooled in anything other than art and its life. The storage capacity and the storage facilities are better than most people realize in terms of the facilities to store what it is that you put in, to keep it up and to keep it going. Now, what we have decided is to obviously be internet-based, mostly because we wanted the artist to feel safe, that you access your own environment with a code and a PIN, more or less like you do with your bank account, and then you arrive in your own environment. You decide what you share with the rest of the world and what you don't. Being, web-based, you can access from anywhere in the world. You don't have to travel with your computer. Your archive don't belong to your artist, to your dealer, to your friend, to your girlfriend, to your ex-wife. If you have a flood, it doesn't matter. And it does give artists a freedom to not worry about the upkeep of their archives. And for that, the few artists that we have worked with are already incredibly grateful. I agree with you, technology is unreliable, but most of it is fixable. And so if the site is being attacked because somebody wants to come in and see what happens in private environment, the system detects it immediately, locks it down, and starts again. So the limitations are the limitations of your own object, in which what he's talking about is his MP3 against his LP. What he's not saying is that iTunes is unreliable. So there's a big difference there between the process and the storage of the data and how reliable that is, and what you use at any given time to download it and experience it. So we have invested heavily into the highest possible quality of storage, security, and again, security. So it's an important difference to make is between the quality of the data and how it's kept and managed and how you access it through your own computer, which breaks down. And yes, the computers get updated regularly to force you to buy a new one, but you still get iTunes and or Google and or other databases. So what we are is just a database. Where I was getting interested in your comments is, I think where we meet is absolutely in trying to get through modern media to make the viewer an expert. And I think that that is incredibly important, because one of the things that I hated about the internet and arts in the beginning of the applications was that the internet was being used mostly for mercantile reasons. And all the websites which came up where galleries attracting you, nothing wrong with that, and then sites which talked about the value of the works, the prices of the work, and everything else. And the internet was not being used as a pure information tool. And nobody, because maybe nobody thought about it, but nobody thought about making it available to the artist to say, before we go into the museum, the virtual or the non-virtual, before we go in the exhibition, before we read the catalog, why don't you, in your own words, tell us what it is that you've done? How you did it, when you did it, what did you have in mind, how many did you want us to see, here are the drawings that I did, whatever it is, I don't mind, just log it all down, or not. I think an artist who doesn't want to tell you anything about their work is just as interesting as an artist that tells you everything. But the freedom has to be given to the artist to express something, put it down, and for somebody to be responsible for the upkeep of that. Now, the difference between you and us is that you are already at stage 2 and 3 and 4. So the artists that come on your radar are not necessarily a young 22-year-old artist that's creating something absolutely extraordinary out of milk bottles in some remote part of Africa. Now, when it reaches your level, you have to go back in the information to find it. What I would like is every artist to say, listen, we're the first filter. There's no filter. With us, anybody can come up, just write everything down. And then when it reaches the museum, they'll take care of it. They will exhibit it virtually or not. They will put it in exhibitions. They'll write about it or whatever. But at least they do it from reliable data. And that's all we're aiming to do. We're aiming to be the first stone to make your work easier and, as I say, more reliable and more true.
I think this is very important that the expertise in the artwork, the connoisseurship, really gets better and bigger with the help of digital tools. For example, to give you what you know already from the press, we have algorithms. That means we have research tools to discover if a dissertation is written up by somebody else or not. Yeah? So precisely this tool people have developed to find out how many percentage of a dissertation is just copied and plagiated by others. Will help us also to make better resources. To give you one example, for example, which is actual, we have now this famous Biennale of Venice, which has a title, Making Worlds. People, it would be easy if you take the tool, you could find easily this research tool. So there was an exhibition in Lüneburg, 2006, which has the same title. Then you would see that it is not correct that somebody steals a title from a minor institution and puts it to a big institution. So I don't blame him, he does know himself. But this is only one example that with digital tools helps us a lot, not only us, but also the audience, the public, to get at a much more scientific approach. But I would like to come back to this kind of archangel problem, which is, this is our biggest limitation. Because printed matter is there to stay for thousands of years. A book, even after 1,500 years, it's still the same. So the information is stored in a correct, sustainable way. Our digital technology and audiovisual technology, what I call recorded matter, is here not to stay for thousands of years, only for some decades. We have seen that how records died, how tape died, etc. So that means in our world, every 5 years, the hardware is changing, the software is changing. MP3, as Akone said, to maintain the technical level is impossible. So we have to invest a lot of money, invest of people, that every 5 years we know that things are changing. So we have to update all the time, technologically, because the industry is always creating new tools. And the artists make with these tools work which is there for eternity. They want to use this technical tool, but then it should work for 100 years.
No, I agree with you. But you see, somebody said to me, why will your system, why do you charge? No. And that's exactly the reason. The reason we charge, because there's no, once you've done the initial framework and everything else, the uploading is by each own person. So I have no cost in terms of that. But my responsibility to the artist and to all the users of the system is to make absolutely sure, and that's the contract. So against the contract, there has to be a contribution. But it's just for that, and it's a headache, and it's complicated, and you have to learn all sorts of things you never knew before. But
you mean in the legal way? Or?
In the legal and mostly in the technological way. The technological way, you suddenly, if you get interested in that, I was selling Impressionist paintings 25 years ago. I never thought I would suddenly have to learn all of that. I don't regret doing it. It's hard work. But it is your responsibility to go with making sure that, you know, the problem is that each time it gets better, you could lose something. So you want to get better and not lose any of it and keep everything going from what you collected from day one. That's the big problem.
For example, to write the history of web art is very difficult because most of the prominent websites or the web artworks from the last 10 years have disappeared. You can't see them anymore.
About the exception of Benjamin Weil, I think who was a whole series of these projects that were given into permanent collections, but it's very rare, no?
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, I know we are running soon out of time, and we also want to open it to the floor, but there is actually maybe one last intervention from Martin Roth, who wanted to say something.
I mean, again, I have always to mention that I'm not an expert in that field, but, you know, again, I want to come back to this kind of, it's a tool. And, I mean, coming from a very conservative institution, I think this kind of being conservative has a certain kind of meaning. It means not all the artists immediately can be shown in a museum. And not all the artists immediately can be shown on the net, if you understand what I mean. There has to be a kind of, I mean, this reminds me somehow in the 60s and 70s where we said everybody's an actor, everybody's a writer, everybody's a philosopher. Yeah, yes, somehow. But there has to be a certain kind of approach, there has to be a certain kind of barrier, a certain kind of limit, and so on. So keep it as a question mark. I just think it has to be, a museum has a worth in itself, a value in itself. It has a certain kind of, the institution, to enter the institution means more than just to be nailed on the wall. That's one part of it. The other one is, I mean, again, keep it very easy. It's a very easy thing. I mean, there's even on the iPhone, there are a lot of, I mean, I'm sure you know that, this kind of introduction in arts and so on. I mean, make it easy for the visitor. That's the major message, at least from our side. Why do we have to go to a library? Why do we have to buy one of those hundreds of stupid art magazines if you can just take this one? And you know immediately there's a little move inside, there's a little whatever explanation, and you are in front of the art piece. So that's what I mean. I mean, we're talking since years about how to make it easy for somebody coming to an exhibition, to a museum, in terms of traffic systems and coffee shops, and I don't know, much more. This is the same level of discussion. It's easy, and that's the reason why it's so interesting. And you can combine it with a lot of other tools. That means, now it's going into details.
But that's already an almost wonderful conclusion. I've got actually one last question to all of you, because I thought it's interesting to think about this whole, who Fang touched on this also, this sort of unpredictability, maybe not master plan. When I spoke to Cedric Price, the late Cedric Price, the visionary inventor of this idea of the Fun Palace, he told me a 21st century museum will utilize calculated uncertainty and conscious incompleteness to produce a catalyst for invigorating change, whilst always producing the harvest of the quiet eye. So that was his definition of a 21st century museum. I wanted to ask you all about this aspect of unpredictability, and maybe end with that question: will there be a digital revolution in the field of museum which cannot be calculated nowadays? Are there maybe things we cannot plan? What about that sort of whole aspect of the unpredictability? Does anybody want to answer that?
I hope there is, in a way. We always want to be surprised by what technology throws up. I think, one hopes that there will be something we haven't thought about, but one hopes that, the originals are still hanging somewhere so we can go and check them out as regularly as we need to. That would be my...
I think it's a great vision by Cedric Price, also in a technical sense. If you allow me, I give first a technical answer, and very shortly, and then I can link it what he's asking. In our technical terms, as unpredictability or uncertainty, what you mentioned here, when I link it what you described, the point is when you have an iPhone, and you want information, you need a search algorithm, no? Technically, no? Because there's hundreds, millions of information, and you want to know the information which you want now. Huh? You have to develop what is always why Google is so good, because they have a good search algorithm. Now we have Wolfram, Alpha Wolfram, a new search algorithm. So the museum, in fact, are always a little bit search algorithms themselves as institution. Mm-hmm. People come there and look for work, and then most of the work is in the basement, and they don't see it, etc. And now comes the point of Cedric Price. He was not satisfied with the research algorithms which the museums are, because they are too finite and too deterministic. You go to the museum, you know precisely, I go in this room and I find here William Blake, and I go in this room and I find it, etc. So he was looking for something of a search algorithm which we call technically random, which is not random, means it's accident, you don't know the future. So random research algorithm will become the most powerful tool also in our museum. And it is very important, because one reason, I give you a theological reason. When you go home now, and you have possibility and watch a fly in front of a window and watch a bee in front of a window, then you will see, at the end of the day, the bee will be dead at the bottom of the window. The fly will be out of the window. Why is it possible that the fly finds out of the window and the bee not? You have observed it, no? With the summer, and you look at the window, you have always a dead bees, but not dead flies. Because dead flies, they have a random research algorithm in the brain, in the DNA. That means they fly on the window, something it doesn't work, then they fly back and make like zzz, and this makes us so nervous, because you always make zzz, and this is precisely the random research algorithm. And they start from random, and suddenly they cannot. The bee always it goes up and down, Cartesian subject. This is not the right way. So precisely, yes, the unpredictability is very important for freedom and for fantasy. So he's completely correct there.
Great. Any other comments?
I feel more in the situation of that bee. Talking about the future of museum, and again, I start with that what I said about half an hour ago. A museum is a museum is a museum. So we always talk about the frame around it. There's in my opinion, there will be no revolution that is, foreseen for the next years. It's more like I'm still surprised that we don't. Again, I'm not the expert, but that we don't use much more of that new technology that is already existing. I had the experience last week. We had a visit by President Barack Obama, And if you in our museum, and if you see the technology that the Secret Service and the FBI is using already, so it's again the military base that are far more advanced than we are. So I think if we connect more a little bit in that case, there might be a little bit of fly system.
No, but one thing we are clear, the fly will be the visitor. Huh? The visitor will be the fly. Yeah?
There could not be a better conclusion. Any questions from the floor? We can now, yeah, I see a question here.
That goes fast.
Yeah.
Thank you. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to study the correspondence between Billy Clover and Pontus Hultén that they had during many years. And this correspondence was letters, telegrams, postcards. And as a curator, it was extremely interesting to see how they, what kind of dialogue they had over the years, thinking about exhibitions, trying out different ideas. And when I was working in a museum as a curator, for me it was a very big problem always, what kind of information do I keep in the archive? And as an art historian, I find everything very interesting, especially if you think like, what will happen 20 years from now when an art historian is reading and trying to find out how an exhibition came about, what kind of correspondence you were having with artists, curators, museums, etc., etc. And at a certain point, actually when I was working on an exhibition on the work of Billy Clover in Sweden, I was like printing out hundreds of emails and I didn't know what to do with them. And at that point, actually, I missed a program that could put together all the emails from a project and save them in some way. And I don't think as curators in museums that we have the knowledge that is needed for that, what we do in the future. And it's also interesting, I had a conversation with an artist, Charlie White, that I made an exhibition with, and we were talking about the different way, our different personalities. We're different persons when we text to each other, when we write emails, when we talk on the phone, when we write letters, and when we actually meet physically. And we came to the conclusion that we're much nicer on email than in real life, because it's much more difficult. The physical meeting is very difficult between people, but it's also more challenging, and you often learn so much more by the physical meeting. And it's also, of course, with the artworks, to be in a space and actually see the physical object. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody wants to answer, comments?
This is precisely what I mean. The storage, with the storage space is infinite. When you print a book, you must make a selection. Yeah? But in digital technology, the storage space is infinite. You are not forced to make a selection. You can keep everything. Yeah? So you cannot. That means you make less a mistake, because when you make a selection, it's your point of view now. Yeah? Maybe in 5 years later, you have a different point of view. Another researcher has another point of view, but he does not find information. Yeah? So it's very good that you can keep everything digital, and so that you can always have a different access, a different perspective. Yeah? And so it's for the research, yeah, it's much better, the situation. Yeah?
Yeah, if I may say at this point, obviously we're decided to start with artists for them to log on their own ontology of their works, but one day we will move on to curators, and this is what we want to scan, because this, to me, tells me more about how Hans Ulrich's brain works than anything else that could come. So this is eventually what I'd like you guys to be able to find, or all of us to be able to find, on as a kept note, because I think this is very interesting. In fact, I wouldn't mind having a copy of that. And this one, if I may say, is even more attractive. Okay, so this is the capacity to encapsulate that, to file it loosely under Ulrich, Obrist, Basel 209, is there. It is there. The technology is there. What fascinated me was that it hadn't been given to the artist to start with, and that nobody before me. So you just sit there thinking it must be a stupid idea if nobody's done it, and then you just wrestle with the fact that somebody invented the biro, and why not? So, but it is, the technology is there, and I totally agree with you. It has to be encapsulated, it has to be captured, it has to be filed in a totally non-market orientated way, non-financially, you know, I'm going to do prints of these. If somebody gets his permission to do a print of that in 25 years' time, that's fine. This is not what we want to do. We just want to put it out there. And I agree with you. I think it's very difficult to read a situation without that.
But also it's quite precisely what you showing in the Hans Ulrich's paper is also precisely for me kind of demonstration of the necessity of a physical meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
That unless this physical meeting, that we're not really able to really go deep into the human being side, which I found also probably that's also kind of maybe another aspect of the perspective on the museum. I think the physical space is always very, very important.
It is.
And because the physical meeting somehow is beyond physical, that's also the necessity that we really need to see the original painting, because that's different from the representation or reproduction of the art. So that's my comment.
If I can give you an anecdote about what this is about. In my past days as a collector, a client really wanted a certain painting of a certain series. And I finally found it, and he so wanted it that as a dealer, I took the plunge and I said, I'm sure it's a sale, which we all know doesn't exist, but I'm going to buy it and sell it to him. And eventually I called him and I said, you know the painting you really wanted? I've got it. You've got to see it. I'm going to send you the transparency, being old-fashioned. And he said, no, I know you've got a JPEG, send me the JPEG. So I said, no, I shot it, you'll have the transparency. Anyway, after 4 minutes, I relented, and I sent him the JPEG, and you have the reaction, immediate, instantaneous. And having done it before, I knew I hadn't made a sale, because I said, yeah, it's interesting. But it's a bit dull. So what do you mean dull? Anyway, but 6 months later, I go to his office, and he shows me something on the screen, and I say, I know this painting, but that's not what it looks like. And this great collector uses his screen dimmed, right? So I just look at this painting, and I said, that's not what it looks like. And so I press a button, and the painting comes alive. And then we both looked at each other, and we thought, so the dull painting was a dull painting because the screen was dimmed, because he looks at facts and figures all day, and because his doctor and his optician have told him to dim the screen. But when suddenly in his inbox comes a painting, so that's why I'm saying, yes, the digital is very interesting, the data is good to propagate, but nothing ever replaces the real experience. Because, again, technologically, you don't know what people are using to make up their mind about what they think of an artwork. So, you know, you've got to keep your doors open, guys.
I would not limit digital technology to this question if it substitutes or not the real experience. I think technology can be also the real experience. Yeah. So this is,
it's like everything,
Yeah.
like movie and everything. So
Exactly.
so the movie is a real experience. It's not just
I mean, just one comment, because I think your question is very interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, the
Jennifer.
The question is if I understand you the right way, if we have one day somehow a society without memory, and then the question is if we get it the right way around, if we have curators, historians, art historians and so on, that have to change their methods with the new technology, or if we have to change the new technologies so that it's again adapted to the research or the scientific world that we had up to now. And I think this is a very crucial question, and I don't know the answer. But I mean, I know from my, without being too directly too open-minded, but I know that we have to have, I mean, certainly a new generation of art historians who know to work, to play on this kind of piano, and to use the new technologies for that, because there's this kind of new methods and an old approach. And I think this is more or less the fundament of your question, and we are right in the middle of that process.
Now we can take one last question, because I think we need to then leave the room. Two, okay, very good.
And it actually leads to what comes from what you were saying. To what extent are you concerned, and is it an issue that some of the artists that you will approach will use this as an artistic medium rather than a recording medium? Because artists have been known, for instance, to change their own work, to misdate their work, and I don't mean this in a malignant way, it could be a very interesting way, but to what extent has this been explored?
An artist is encouraged to create a label at the time of the art's creation. So we're trying to get the immediacy between the creation of the label and the creation of the work of art. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're experiencing a problem with all the artists we're exploring who we're working with, who wanted to say, well, what do I do with the work about 20 years ago? So I said, well, you've got to start somewhere, so start now. Now, the artist logs the data and all the parameters. They are locked and locked forever unless they come to us, explain to us why they want to change something. And I'm sure there will be situations where we're just going to say, we're terribly sorry, but you told us you made it in 2003. We have the image and the entry from 2003. If you're telling us that you reworked it, that's fine. But you can't now tell us you suddenly changed your mind and you made it in 1983. It just wasn't.
Well, that's a nuts and bolts response, but it doesn't address the question of an artist saying, here's a new format, and instead of using it as an archival system, I'd like to use it to make a work,
Yes, well, if the work of art is the Blue Label, then the work of art is the Blue Label. That's what you're saying. But we have, yeah, absolutely. But we have explored the thoughts that for what we're hoping is that, of course, Maurizio Catalan would like him to mess with the system and do something Catalanesque with the system. Is that what you had in mind? Well, that will be part of the system, in the same way as authors use different names to publish books, or it is different, but we'll see. How we addressed it, well, with the best goodwill in the world and, with every intention to stay as true to what was created and the ontology. We'll see. Be delighted to tell you about it when it happens.
Okay, one last question.
Oh yeah, I have a short question. I'm a technologist for 30 years in America and Europe, and I've been asked to introduce ubiquitous digital technology in 3 major museums here. And I've observed a problem. I just want to make a very brief statement on that. With museums and art historians. The problem is not technological. The techniques are there, the technology is there, and I've been using it for 20 years in other areas. The problem is the intellectual grasp by art historians of how to encapsulate this information to enhance the visitor experience when he's in the museum. They don't have the quality assurance, or they're worried about that. They don't have the mechanisms in the back office. They don't have the tools. It's very linear, what you called the B. And they stumble over this when I ask the question, where's the information? And like Faggionato said, it has to be fixed and free. So the user comes in and he can use his mobile, now at the MoMA, and the Cleveland Museum, and the V&A, and the Tate, and I'm familiar in detail technologically exactly what they're doing. That's not the problem. It's an intellectual problem with art historians. They don't have the information, modular packets of information, that they can tailor to the interest of the visitor, whether the visitor wants to become expert or not, which I highly question, or if he just wants more information or some comparisons with other pieces while he's in the museum. I'm not talking about vicarious experience of Second Life. I don't think that's quintessentially relevant to the museum experience. It may enhance it, it may broaden it, but we're not talking about that, or I'm not talking about that with these museums, and I'm introducing this technology today. How do you communicate information, and what is the information, and they don't have a clue what that information is? That's the problem. It's not a technological problem.
I agree. Totally agree with that.
Peter?
I think you're quite right, but there's some very important exceptions, which I really would like to discuss at the end. Because when I say in future, the museums have to embrace digital technology precisely to have a future. We have already 3 institutions which do it. It's the Centre Pompidou, it is ZKM and Reina Sofia. When you go to their shows, it's a later in Sofia, you see a radical change how they make exhibitions. For example, 10 years ago, when you make at the Pompidou a show about Yves Klein, you see only paintings. Because technically it was not possible to show films and video, it was too complicated. Today with digital technology, you have a continuous showing. So now you go in the Pompidou, you see an exhibition about Yves Klein, and 50% of the material is digital presentation. You see films, you see videos, you see photographs, you see even a film by himself doing, what was the sport? Yoga, or what was it? What was the sport, the name of the Japanese?
Judo.
Judo, yeah. So you see me making judo, no? So a lot of archive material, which was never been able to be shown. No? All his papers, his writings, even all of his interviews, his audio interviews, there was a big room that you get here, all his interviews. And we do it all the time at ZKM to bring a lot of archive material on the same level like the artwork itself. And now with Manolo in Reina Sofia, he's following the same. You go in, and you see suddenly not only artworks, you see films by documentary films by Rauschenberg, documentary films about Robert Morris, etc.
Guernica also.
Exactly, yeah. Guernica. So suddenly the exhibitions have really changed. So there is some hope. Precisely, the problem is there, but there are some exceptions that people learn to use this technology. And already now, the presentation is changed there. And this is precisely the future. It's not only online, which is very important, but also in the place itself, we use a lot of technology, digital technology.
So there is actually one last question.
My name is Nurit Nelson. I'm an art director of the JCVA International Residency Program. And I think I would approach first Martin Roth, if it's possible, and afterwards the other panelists, about Second Life. When you said your experience is, I understand accessible to the viewers. I also teach, so I know how it is very easy for this generation to get connected to art through this medium. But does it provoke also a profound acquaintance with the artwork? Because already at the end of the talk, you have already said that there's no replacement to the real encounter with the artwork and the experience, but does it really provoke also a profound dialogue and not just a superficial acquaintance?
Yeah, good question. I mean, honestly, I don't know the exact answer. I don't think that we have enough research done to deliver that kind of answer. But, and it has to be done. But at least it creates interest. And I think that's the major issue. It creates interest, and that's the reason why I had this quotation before that somebody from Cleveland, I think it was Cleveland, I can't remember, was said, I mean, I have to come in that beautiful city, I thought it's bombed, and so on. It was a real dialogue going on, you watched that. I think that's the beginning of it. And then, I mean, I think we're all coming from museum. It's the real thing. You have to be there. Don't touch it, but you have to be there. And you have to see it. This is one part of it. But the other one, we had an exhibition of Gerhard Richter in Beijing last year. And I mean, an amazing amount of young visitors, and all with a mobile in front of the painting. And so I talked to a lot of people, because I mean, I watched that for an hour or two, and then I thought, I mean, I have to know that, what's going on. I mean, everybody, literally everybody. And they said, we want to, I mean, more or less have no idea of what I'm seeing. I want to know more about it. I take it with me. I put it on. I mean, some said I need it as a screensaver. But, I mean, this is very positive if you have that answer. But, so, you know, it's kind of two directions. You take the digital images with you to do more with it for those who are already interested. And the other one is you make people interested. That's, in my opinion, the major message of what we are doing right now, or the major content.
Do any of the other speakers want to on this question?
Yeah. You do. Yeah.
Yeah, who Fang?
So I think maybe so far we still haven't really spent like enough time in Second Life, but I also would like to take Second Life as kind of metaphor to see that how, you know, this kind of multi-layer of reality that we, I always think that's a real. The real in the sense that it's not, you know, the meaning of virtual actually is just kind of how to reflect something more physical, but actually is always, you know, the whole is the world that we're living in. So I think that really needs probably time, because artworks always needs time that to transform. And so I don't know, within our experience of doing this I'm City, because we have been like working on this since 2 years ago, but still that now is the kind of stage that we still feel that we just touch something. And so, yeah, I think I would really agree that this is really the process that now we are having new experience.
So as would say Douglas Gordon, it has only just begun. That's also true for this panel. As you all know, the most important things often happen in the coffee breaks. I see that there are more questions, but I propose we move out. For those of you who can address the speakers directly, I'd like to thank very much Anne, Fang, Martin, Peter, all of you. Thank you very much.